It was strange how silence could ache more than noise. That morning, I stood at the edge of my porch, the sky still dim with sleep, clutching a chipped mug of coffee as steam curled into the chill. The cows hadn't started their usual fuss, the rooster hadn't crowed, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't name, like something was off in the world, but I didn't know what. The air smelled of damp soil and summer dust. I closed my eyes, tried to will that peace into me. But peace doesn't visit often when you've been watching everything you've built get treated like a joke. It had been happening for weeks by then. The first time I saw the Lamborghini, I thought I was hallucinating. It tore across my east field like a rabid animal, throwing up spirals of topsoil as it skidded around the bend, a blinding white blur slicing through my crops like a blade through paper. It was so out of place, so violently loud against the softness of the farm. I stood frozen with my shovel in hand, just staring. My cows scattered. A hen flapped itself nearly to death. Dust curled around the tires like smoke. I barely registered the screams of laughter coming from inside the car. They weren't even ashamed. There were two of them. Always two. Two women dressed like they were heading to a nightclub, hair too perfect for this much wind, music blaring like they were hosting a party on wheels. One had her head out the window, laughing like she was high on something I didn't understand. The other, behind the wheel, wore sunglasses the size of dinner plates and chewed gum like it owed her money. Later I'd learned their names, Susan and Carol. But that first day, they were just intruders. Strangers ripping through my world with zero regard. I tried to flag them down. I raised both hands, standing in the path like a scarecrow come alive. The Lamborghini slowed just enough not to kill a goat. When it finally screeched to a stop, I walked up to the driver's side. "You lost?" I asked. The one behind the wheel, Carol, looked me up and down like I was the weirdo. "Nope," she said, grinning. "Taking a shortcut. GPS brought us this way." "This is private property," I said, pointing at the old hand-painted sign they'd flown past like it was invisible. "You're trespassing." Susan leaned forward from the passenger seat, snapped a picture of me with a laugh. "Farmer John's mad," she said mockingly. "He's even got a pitchfork." I didn't. It was a shovel. But they didn't care. They didn't care about the land, or the animals, or the boundaries, or me. They revved the engine, laughed harder, and tore off again, leaving tire tracks and crushed fence posts in their wake. I stood there as the dust swallowed me. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe just a couple of city folks who took a wrong turn. Maybe they'd realized their mistake and wouldn't come back. They came back the next day, and the day after that. It became routine. Every few days, around the same time in the afternoon, the earth would start to vibrate. Not from tractors or thunder, but from bass. That thumping, vibrating bass that rattled the windows before the car even came into view. Then came the laughter, the blinding white SUV, the squealing tires, the chaos. My cows were scared. My dogs wouldn't stop barking. And my fields, my work, looked like they'd been vandalized by drunk teenagers in high heels. I tried everything you'd expect. Polite notes on fence posts, gone by morning. A chain across the path, cut by nightfall. I called the sheriff's department, left voicemails. No response. Even cornered the local deputy at the diner once. He was dipping fries into his milkshake like a child. "Trespassing's hard to prove," he said with a shrug. "You need video, witnesses. Something solid." "I'm the witness," I said. He chuckled like that was cute. "Well, you know how it is. Those HOA people, always stirring things up." So that was it. I was on my own. The rage wasn't instant. It brewed slowly, like water set on low heat. Every time they tore through my land, a little more of me boiled. Every rut in the soil, every broken post, every scared animal. It all added up like drops in a bucket. Until one morning, I saw it. A perfect patch of soybean had been sliced clean through by their tires. That section was my best hope for the season, and they destroyed it like it meant nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. My niece sent me a TikTok. "Look, Uncle, isn't this your land?" she wrote. It was. The clip showed Susan laughing, Carol speeding, music blasting. Hashtags like hashtag shortcuts, hashtag farm vibes, hashtag no cows given. The comments made my stomach twist. OMG Queen's nail polish. Country roads equals racetrack skull. Hope they run over that pitchfork guy again, faced with tears of joy. It stopped being funny. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something deeper than that. Something slow and calculating. That's when the idea started. Not revenge. Not really. But consequences. There's a difference. You plant poison, you don't get flowers. They came on Fridays and Sundays, mostly. I started watching the weather, the terrain, the way the ground changed when it rained. I noticed something. Just past the corral, there was a low patch. Naturally damp. Clay soil. Easy to miss, easier to manipulate. And suddenly I saw it. Not a trap, but a lesson. A patch of truth waiting to be built. Over the next few nights, I worked in silence. Dug when the moon was high. Brought in clay, hoses, sprinklers, timer switches. Smoothed the surface to look untouched. I called it the welcome mat. I tested it with a hay bale. It sank like a stone. Then I waited. The fourth day was quiet. Too quiet. I kept looking out the window, half hoping they wouldn't come, half hoping they would. I had the remote in my pocket all day, thumb resting on the button, just waiting. The field looked calm, untouched. No sign that under the soft layer of straw was a slick, wet trap just waiting for their tires. Sunset came, and with it, the familiar thump of bass. That deep, stomach-rattling beat that always came before them, like a warning. I stepped onto my porch and saw the dust cloud in the distance. There they were, just as expected. The white Lamborghini shining like a diamond in the last bit of light. Carol was driving, scarf tied around her head like some kind of race car star. Susan had her arms out the window again, her phone already recording. They were laughing, shouting something I couldn't hear over the music. I didn't move. I stood by the fence like a statue, watching them get closer. They were so sure of themselves, so happy, so clueless. As they neared the pit, I whispered to myself, showtime. They hit the edge of the field and didn't slow down. The car moved like it always did, fast, confident like nothing could stop it. I waited until they were almost there. 30 yards. 20. I pressed the button. A soft click. A distant hiss. Then I slid the remote back into my pocket and watched. At first, nothing changed. The car rolled over the straw, engine humming, tires biting into the dirt. Susan waved at me like I was some kind of fan. "You want a ride, Farmer John?" she yelled, laughing. 10 yards now. Then the change came. The back wheels dipped just a little. Not enough to notice unless you were looking. I was looking. They dipped again. Carol's hands twitched on the wheel. She felt it. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. And then the tires started to spin. It was slow at first, a soft sound like stepping into a wet sock. Then louder. The wheels were trying, but the ground was giving up. The mud kicked up behind them in long, wet arcs. The car jerked once. Move a little. Then stopped. Susan's laughter cut off. Carol shouted something I couldn't make out. Then she did the worst thing she could have done. She floored it. The tires screamed. Mud sprayed high into the air. I saw a splash of it hit the windshield and smear across like brown paint. The car sunk deeper. The back end dropped low. The front tilted slightly like it was bowing to the ground. One of the side mirrors disappeared into the mud. Susan opened the door and tried to step out. Her foot sank instantly, ankle deep. She shrieked, took another step, sank deeper, tried to pull her foot free, and lost her sandal. She slipped forward, both arms flailing, and landed face first in the muck. Her scream turned into a muffled yell. Her arms slapped at the ground as she tried to stand. When she finally did, she was covered from neck to knees in thick, dripping clay. She looked like a frosted cake someone dropped. Carol didn't move. She was frozen. I think she was trying to figure out if she could drive out of it somehow. She looked down at the mess outside, saw her friend covered in mud, and for a moment, I think she knew. There was no getting out clean. She tried to climb out through the window, put one foot on the hood for balance. Big mistake. It was slick now, wet, slimy, impossible to hold on to. Her foot slipped. She fell sideways into the pit with a heavy thud. Her scream echoed across the field. I could hear them yelling at each other, voices sharp and panicked. Susan was crying. Carol was swearing. I leaned on the fence and just watched. Then came the rest of them. Another car pulled up near the trail. A convertible full of their friends, all dressed like they were going to brunch, not a rescue mission. They got out, phones in hand, already filming. One of them pointed at Susan and laughed so hard she bent over. "Oh my God," she wheezed. "You look like a chocolate marshmallow." Another one said, "This is going straight to TikTok." Susan spun around, face red under the mud. "Stop filming. I'm serious." But they didn't. They got closer, phones raised, laughter rising. Carol stood up slowly, her hair stuck to one side of her face, mascara running like black tears. She looked around, then finally saw me, still standing by the fence. Her face twisted. "You did this," she screamed. I didn't say anything, just raised one eyebrow. Susan staggered forward, pointing a shaking, mud-covered finger at me. "You're going to pay for this, you psycho hillbilly. This is a luxury car. You're welcome to try and tow it out," I said, calm as ever. "Last time something got stuck in that spot, we needed a crane." Their friends howled with laughter. Susan slipped again, fell backwards with a loud squelch. The sound was almost satisfying. Carol was too busy yelling threats to help her. "I'll sue you," she shouted. "You think this is funny?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. They froze. I needed proof, right? I said, not looking at them. "Well, Deputy Marks, if you're watching, here's your trespassing footage and your destruction of property. And just for fun, a couple of threats." Susan tried to charge toward the fence. Her feet dragged like heavy boots stuck in mud. "Delete that video right now." "Sure," I said, "right after you delete my crops and fences." The other women, their so-called friends, were now live streaming. One had already gone viral catching a duck 2 weeks ago. This was gold to them. "Oh my God." One said, "Carol just ate it. Look at her knees." And just when things couldn't get worse for them, sirens. Not police. Not fire. Just loud air horns. A tow truck crawled over the same hill they had barreled down earlier. The driver leaned out the window, sipping from a cup. "You ladies stuck," he called out. Susan tried to straighten up, but mud dripped from her chin. "Get this car out now." The driver scratched his beard. "Not without a waiver. Terrain like this? Your insurance cover off-road." Carol blinked. "What? It's not off-road." He shrugged. "Sure doesn't look like a road." The car sat deep in the pit, the gleaming white now painted in shame. Susan screamed at the driver. Carol tried to wipe mud from her phone screen, but the damage was done. I turned and walked back to the porch, the sky now darkening, my coffee still warm in the mug. I took a sip and smiled as the tow truck started laying down wooden boards. That car wasn't going anywhere fast. By the time I made it back to the porch, the laughter had turned into shouting, the kind of shouting that comes when people realize no one's coming to save them. I sat down slowly, the wood creaking under me, and let the sounds roll over the field like distant thunder. It wasn't joy I felt. Not quite. It wasn't revenge either. But there was something about seeing consequences catch up to people who thought they were above them. I watched the tow truck driver step out, calm as you please, like he'd pulled up to a picnic. He didn't rush, didn't even act surprised. Just looked the whole mess over and nodded to himself like, "Yup, another day in the office." Susan was still arguing, her arms flailing, voice breaking. Carol had mud smeared across her chest and hair, mascara and now a black trail down her face. They looked less like rich girls and more like two raccoons who'd fought in a ditch. He walked around the car once, hands in his pockets, then looked up at them. "Gonna need a signature," he said, "and maybe a prayer." Carol blinked. "What?" "You're sunk pretty good," he added. "Won't move unless I rig the back axle, and even then, it'll drag half the field with it." Susan's voice cracked. "Do it. I don't care. Just get out." He handed her a clipboard. "Initial there. Waives liability. If the frame bends, or paint scrapes, not on me." She hesitated, then scribbled something that barely passed as a name. Behind them, the convertible girls were still recording. One of them whispered, "This is gold," and I saw her grin so wide her lip gloss caught the sun. Another one had already uploaded a slow-motion clip of Susan falling, dramatic music and all. They didn't seem like friends to me. Not real ones, anyway. Just people waiting for the next story to go viral. As the driver worked, laying down thick planks and adjusting chains, I stood back up and walked over. Not too close. Just close enough. Susan saw me coming. "You think this is funny?" she spat. I looked at her calmly. No, I think this is sad. Carol scoffed. You think you're some hero? I shook my head. Nope, just a farmer trying to protect his land. There was a moment, a small one, where she didn't have a comeback. Just stared at me, eyes heavy, chest rising and falling fast. Then Susan, still angry, said, "You'll regret this." I raised my phone slightly. Already got all the threats on video. Want to add another one? She turned away, cursing under her breath. Her hand shook as she wiped mud from her arms. I looked at the tow driver. You need anything? He smiled just a little. Nah, got it covered. But thanks. It took almost an hour to get the car free. The engine groaned like it was embarrassed. The tires spun and squealed, throwing more sludge into the air. At one point, Carol stepped too far back and slipped again, landing in a puddle so deep her scarf floated off her head. That one got cheers from the girls by the road. Finally, with a loud sucking sound, the Lamborghini came loose, dragging with it a chunk of the field. Its once perfect body was streaked with thick lines of brown and black. The undercarriage clanked, and the rear bumper was hanging a little loose. Still, it moved. The driver gave a thumbs up and slowly backed it toward the trail. Susan and Carol didn't say goodbye, didn't yell anything else. They just climbed in, wet, angry, broken, and rolled away as fast as they could without getting stuck again. Their friends followed, honking one last time for effect. Then it was quiet again. I stood in the middle of the damage. The air smelled like wet clay and diesel. My field was torn up, but it didn't hurt like it had before. Maybe because now it meant something. It wasn't just damage. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't just yelling at clouds, that my land mattered. The next morning, I woke up to silence again. No bass, no screeching tires, just birds and bugs and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. And then my phone buzzed. It was my niece again. Just one word, viral. I opened the link, and there it was, the whole thing. The fall, the mud, the yelling, the threats. Cut together with edits, music, and a dramatic slow-mo of Susan face-planting into the field. Over 1 million views in a few hours. By noon, the local news had picked it up. Entitled Women Trespass on Farm, get a muddy lesson in return. I didn't post anything myself. I didn't need to. The story was already out there, being told over and over, each version slightly different, but always ending the same. The car stuck, the girls humiliated, the farmer quiet but steady. People started showing up at the farm, not to bother me, but to shake my hand. One guy brought a 6-pack of beer and a thank you note that read, "For all of us who've dealt with people like that." Another older man, who I hadn't spoken to in years, just gave me a nod and said, "You did right." Even Harold, my neighbor who never spoke more than 5 words at a time, chuckled when I showed him the clip. "Told you," he wheezed. "You can't polish stupid." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it felt good to not be alone in it. But of course, it wasn't over. 2 days later, a man in a suit knocked on my door. He had a tight smile and handed me an envelope like it was something sacred. Inside, lawsuit papers. Susan and Carol were suing me for emotional damage, car repairs, online embarrassment. The words were dramatic, almost like a movie script, psychological warfare, intentional humiliation, malicious sabotage. There were blurry screenshots of them covered in mud, looking like wet cats. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my sandwich. But I didn't panic. I had videos, voicemails to the sheriff, emails to the HOA, photos of the damage. Witnesses, their own friends had posted the footage. I even had clips where the "no trespassing" signs were clearly in the background. So I called Vic, my old friend who owed me for pulling him out of a ditch that one snowy Christmas. He was a lawyer now, and when he read the complaint, he laughed for a solid 2 minutes. "They walked onto your land, trashed your field, and fell in a puddle," he said. "Let them try. We didn't just defend. We countered. Trespassing, property damage, harassment. I added a bill for the broken fence, the ruined crops, the time I lost." Vic packaged it up neat, sent it back with a bow. A week later, the lawsuit disappeared. Not because they gave up, but because their own lawyer saw the story blowing up online and probably didn't want his name on it. They went quiet after that. And then something strange happened. After that, things changed in ways I didn't expect. I hadn't set out to become some local hero. I was just trying to protect what was mine. But the internet had a different idea. The video didn't stop at 1 million views. It climbed. Fast. Within days, it was on YouTube, Facebook, even Twitter, or whatever it was called now. People shared it like it was the best thing they'd seen all year. One version had dramatic music under it, like it was a movie trailer. Another was turned into a meme. When karma doesn't need to knock, it just pulls you in by the bumper. I didn't say much. I wasn't interested in fame. I kept my head down, worked the land, fixed what I could. But word spread. My old, barely used farm page suddenly had followers. A lot of them. I checked one night out of curiosity and saw the number jump from 100 to over 10,000 in just a week. At first, I didn't post anything. I didn't know what to say. But then I took a picture of the tire marks left in the field, now hardened into dried clay. I added a caption, "Sometimes the earth bites back." That one post blew up. Comments poured in. "You're a legend. Teach me your ways, Farmer Gandalf." My dream is to be this level of calm and savage. It was strange. Funny even. I'd spent months trying to get someone, anyone, to take the damage seriously. And now people all over the country were rooting for me like I just won a war. So I leaned into it. I made a short video. Nothing dramatic. Just me standing by the patch of land, now famously known online as the Bog of Karen. I explained how I'd improved soil drainage legally and how you could discourage trespassers without hurting anyone. Just facts. Just the truth. That went viral too. Then came the sponsors. A boot company sent me free gear. A garden hose brand wanted me to test their product. Even a podcast about rural justice invited me to speak. I skipped the one that offered a mini-reality series. I'm not made for cameras, but I did take the boots. They were good boots. I didn't do it for clout. But I won't lie, there was something deeply satisfying about the world finally seeing what I saw. That sometimes people need a hard stop to realize they've gone too far. And in this case, the hard stop was 20 feet of mud, manure, and a farmer who had just had enough. Months passed. I didn't see Susan and Carol again. Not on my land, not online. Not for a while. Then one Saturday morning, I ran into them at the grocery store. They didn't look the same. Gone were the rhinestones, the big sunglasses, the shiny accessories. They were plain jeans and sweatshirts. Hair tied back. No makeup. No noise. I spotted them first by the produce aisle. They were pushing a cart together, arguing softly over apples. For a second, I almost didn't recognize them. They looked normal. Smaller somehow. Carol saw me. Her eyes met mine. Just a flicker. Then she looked away quickly, like she hoped I hadn't noticed. Susan muttered something I didn't catch. They turned their cart and moved toward the other end of the store, heads down. I didn't follow. I just nodded, almost polite, and walked past, whistling. That was enough. I didn't need to say anything. Sometimes silence says more. Still, I kept the sprinkler system buried in that patch. Just in case. I didn't trust that people like them were fully changed. But I hoped. I put the signs back up. Clear, bold letters. Private property. Trespassers will be embarrassed. And life got quiet again. The cows were calm. The fences stood straight. The only tire tracks in my soil belonged to tractors and boots that earned their place. No more music. No more screaming. No more clouds of dust blowing across my fields. I walk out some mornings with a cup of coffee and just breathe. The land looked peaceful again. The sky wide open, the air clear. There was healing in that. Not dramatic. Just steady. Like the land was saying, "You did good." But there was one last thing I wanted to say. One lesson I kept coming back to. They thought they could get away with anything. That their money, their noise, their followers made them untouchable. They laughed at signs, mocked warnings, ignored the quiet voice telling them to stop. But nature doesn't care who you are. It doesn't matter how shiny your car is or how many likes you get. If you keep stepping on people, keep crossing lines, one day the ground will shift under you. It won't shout. It won't warn. It'll just sink you. And no phone, no filter, no follower count will save you from that. So if you've ever felt like someone walked all over you, remember, you don't always have to scream. You don't have to fight loud or fight dirty. Sometimes, all you need is patience. And maybe a little mud. I didn't expect things to stay quiet forever, but they did for longer than I thought they would. Days turned into weeks, and every morning started the same way. Coffee on the porch, a slow walk past the barn, the low sounds of the animals waking up. No more roaring engines. No bass shaking the windows. No blurred streak of a Lamborghini ripping across my fields. It was almost like a dream I'd made up. But the ruts in the earth, now hardened into deep scars, reminded me it had all been real. The town still talked about it. At the diner, at the feed store, even at Sunday church. People who barely knew me stopped to say, "You're that guy from the video, right?" I'd nod, offer a quiet smile, and move on. I didn't need the attention. What mattered was that it stopped. My niece, who'd first sent me that viral clip, called one evening just to laugh. "Uncle," she said, "you're a TikTok legend. Do you know they're calling that spot on your land the Karen Trap?" I chuckled. I'd heard worse. One afternoon, I was repairing the same stretch of fence they'd broken, again, when my neighbor Harold pulled up in his old truck. He stayed in the driver's seat, window rolled down. "Just wanted to say," he said, squinting at me, "what you did, it meant something." I wiped sweat from my forehead and leaned on the post. Didn't feel like much at the time. "Well," he said, "it was." He didn't explain further, and he didn't have to. Some things didn't need long speeches. The clip had made its rounds, sure. But what stuck with people wasn't just the mess or the mud, or even the expensive car going down like a stone. It was that someone finally pushed back. Calmly. Legally. Without yelling or throwing punches. Just with patience, planning, and a whole lot of clay. People kept asking if I planned it all for the camera. I didn't. I didn't even own a TikTok. That was their world, not mine. But sometimes the internet, for all its noise, picks up on something real. And this time it did. I got a few letters in the mail, too. Actual handwritten ones. One was from a farmer up north. Said his land was being used as a trail by rich kids on dirt bikes. "You gave me the courage to do something about it," he wrote. Another letter, short and shaky, came from a woman I didn't know. She wrote, "I don't have a farm, but I know what it feels like to be ignored. Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy." That one stayed with me. I pinned it to the fridge. The thing is, it was never about payback. Not really. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted peace. Respect. A little space to live and work without being laughed at or stepped on. That's what people miss sometimes. We don't fight back because we're angry. We fight back because we've been pushed too far for too long. And when that quiet person finally draws a line, it's not about rage. It's about enough. Things returned to a kind of normal, but it wasn't the same normal I had before. Something had shifted, not just in town or online, but in me. I felt steadier, not happier exactly, but grounded, like I'd proved something, even if it was just to myself. I didn't walk around feeling like some kind of hero. I still had fences to mend, animals to feed, soil to till. The farm didn't care if I had internet fame. It just wanted work like always. But the peace I'd fought for, I could feel it now, in the quiet of early mornings, in the stillness of the fields, in the way my boots sank into undisturbed earth. There were no more tire tracks where they didn't belong. No more laughter in the distance that didn't come from joy, but from mockery. One evening, I was finishing up in the barn when I saw headlights roll up my drive. My heart jumped, just for a second. Old habits die hard. But it wasn't them. It was a man in his 50s, gray beard, wearing a faded ball cap. He stepped out, holding a small box. "You don't know me," he said. "But I saw the video." I nodded, not sure what to say. He opened the box. Inside were homemade cookies. My daughter's been dealing with something similar. At her school, kids filming her, messing with her stuff, making her feel small. She saw your video and said, "That's what standing up looks like." So, thank you. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not the emotional type, but his words hit somewhere deep. "I didn't do it for attention," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That's why it mattered." He handed me the box and left. No small talk, no photos, no tagging me in anything. Just thanks. After he left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down, holding that box of cookies like it was heavier than it looked. It's strange how doing something small, something you think only matters in your world, can ripple out like that. A few days later, I got another message. This time from a local teacher. She wanted to bring her class by the farm, not for photos or videos, but to talk about boundaries, respect, and how to handle conflict without turning cruel. I agreed, with one condition. They had to help out for an hour. Pull weeds, carry feed, shovel a little. Just enough to understand what the land asks for. They came on a Friday. 10 kids, all city-raised, staring at the chickens like they'd never seen anything move without batteries. I told them stories. Not about the trap or the video, just about the land. How it grows when you treat it right. How it fights back when you don't. One girl asked, "Did you ever get scared?" I paused. "Yeah," I said. "A few times." She looked surprised. "But you didn't act scared." Doesn't mean I wasn't. But fear doesn't mean stop. Sometimes it just means go careful. That moment stuck with me. Because the truth is, I was scared. Not of Susan and Carol, not of their threats, but of being ignored forever. Of yelling into the wind and never being heard. Of watching the place I loved be treated like a joke and no one caring enough to stop it. But eventually, I learned that being quiet isn't the same as being weak. Sometimes, the strongest thing you could do is wait. Watch. And when the time's right, press the button. It was late October when the rain came heavy for the first time in weeks. I watched from the porch as it soaked the earth, washing away dry dust and revealing the soft underbelly of the soil. The same patch where the Lamborghini had sunk months earlier turned into a shallow pond. The clay still held moisture like a secret. I smiled without meaning to. I hadn't touched that spot since the tow truck left. I thought about filling it in, smoothing it out, planting over it. But I never did. Not because I was sentimental, but because every time I looked at it, I remembered, you don't have to be loud to make a point. That field had spoken clearer than I ever could. I still got messages now and then, people asking for advice on dealing with neighbors. Folks wanted to send me free boots or farm gear, and sometimes just strangers saying, "Thank you." A guy from out west messaged to say he'd started putting up proper signs around his property after watching the video. Another woman sent a photo of her backyard with a simple caption, inspired by a farmer with a fence and a plan. I never expected to become part of anyone's story, but somehow I had. One morning, I drove into town to pick up some supplies. The clerk at the hardware store rang up my order and leaned across the counter. "You hear about Susan and Carol?" I paused. "No." He lowered his voice like he was sharing state secrets. "Word is they sold the Lamborghini. Can't show their faces around here anymore without someone yelling Karen trap from across the parking lot." I didn't say anything, just nodded, picked up my bag, and walked out. I wasn't proud of their humiliation. That had never been the goal. What mattered to me wasn't how they ended up. It was that they finally stopped treating the land and the people on it like background noise in their personal movie. I saw them one more time after that. It was in passing near the edge of town. They were driving a gray Kia Soul, windows up, no music, no makeup. I wouldn't have recognized them if I hadn't looked twice. They saw me too. Carol's eyes flicked to mine through the windshield. For a moment, she held the stare. And in that tiny window of silence, I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Not hate, not arrogance, just quiet, maybe even understanding. She looked away, and the car rolled on. No dust, no drama. And I realized something in that moment. The real lesson hadn't been mine to give. It had been the land's. You can take pictures, yell, file lawsuits, go viral, but the land doesn't care about any of that. The land just waits. It remembers every step, every track, every wrong turn. And when you finally stop, when you fall, when the world laughs and turns away, the land stays. It doesn't need revenge. It teaches through silence. That's what made it so powerful. That muddy patch, once a shortcut for people who couldn't be bothered to wait at a red light, had become something else. Not just a place of comeuppance, but a reminder of limits, of patience, of balance. The land had drawn a line, and for once someone saw it. Winter came slow that year. The air turned crisp, and the sky lost its warmth, stretching wide and pale over the fields. I found myself waking up earlier, stepping outside with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the steam rise and drift into the stillness. There was peace again, the kind that comes after a long, dragging storm. That patch of field, the one where it all happened, never grew right again. Something about the clay stayed different, like it remembered what it had done. I never fixed it, not fully. I kept the straw over it, kept the sprinkler system buried, just in case. Not because I want to trap anyone else, but because it reminded me that you don't have to erase the past to move on from it. And people stopped coming. The attention faded, like it always does. The internet moved on to other things. New scandals, new trends. The views slowed. The comments quieted. But the lesson? That stayed. One night, I sat by the fireplace with my niece and her little brother. They were visiting for the weekend. He was young, the kind of kid who asked questions with his whole face. He looked up at me and said, "Uncle, why didn't you just yell at them?" I smiled, took a slow breath. "Because yelling is easy," I told him. "They just yell back. But if someone never hears a quiet no, they never learn to respect it. Sometimes people need to get stuck to understand where the line is." He thought about that for a long moment. Then he nodded like it made sense, even if he couldn't explain why. That's the thing about respect. You can't demand it. Not really. You teach it, with time, with patience. And if that fails with mud, this story was never about revenge. It wasn't about getting famous, or proving someone wrong, or going viral. It was about boundaries, not just fences and signs, but human ones. About standing up for something you care about when it feels like no one else sees it. It was about a man, a farm, and the quiet truth that we all carry lines inside us, the kind that shouldn't be crossed. And when they are, we have a choice. We can shout, we can beg, or we can hold steady, wait, and let nature speak in its own slow, undeniable way. In the end, the Lamborghini was just a symbol. Bright, loud, fast. Everything the world tells us power looks like. But it sank, not in anger, not because someone made it. It sank because it didn't belong where it was. And the land? The land didn't scream. It didn't fight. It just swallowed it. There's a strange kind of justice in that. A justice that doesn't need an audience. So if you're out there, maybe you're tired of being ignored, walked over, laughed at. Remember this. You don't need to yell. You don't need to fight dirty. Just stand your ground. Let time, truth, and the weight of actions do what they always do. Because sometimes the best revenge is a field that waits. And if all else fails, a little water, a little clay, and a steady hand will remind the world. Some lines still mean something.